Today we will be covering a true story about serial killer Larry Hall and the guy who tried to get a confession out of him. The movie opens up about the butterfly effect. Everything is connected. A girl is riding her bike in the countryside. Then it shows James, aka Jimmy, getting out of his red Dodge Viper outside a warehouse. These two stories will eventually connect. Roger picks up Jimmy to escort him to a tied-up Danny. Danny is Jimmy's best friend, but it seems Danny tried to cheat Roger. Roger continually shoots towards Danny to scare them. Somehow Jimmy calms Roger down and Jimmy is able to save Danny's life. At dinner, Jimmy is extremely fond of the waitress Rochelle, and the two go at it later. The next morning, while making smoothies, the police are raiding his house. The DEA choke him, then cuff him. Lauren, an FBI agent, confiscates all of his guns including an AK-47. Jimmy ends up in prison when his dad Big Jim visits him. His dad says he could get 5 years if he takes the deal. His dad is disappointed and always wanted Jimmy to have a normal life and normal job. During the trial, Jimmy pleads guilty for trafficking narcotics and having firearms. The judge gives him 10 years, instead of 5 years that was promised him by his lawyer Edmund Beaumont. 7 months have passed, and Jimmy is brought to Lauren and Beaumont. Jimmy has apparently done real good in prison by selling P-Hub magazines. Lauren knows that Jimmy gets along with everyone because he's charming. He's able to talk to anyone while people tell their secrets to him. Lauren gets to the point and wants Jimmy to transfer to a different prison to elicit a confession. The man in question has killed 2 people, but they need him to confess to the locations of 13 more bodies. Jimmy doesn't want to do this, but Lauren says he can have his freedom if he gets the location of Patricia Rietler's body. Lauren says it's possible the killer may get out of prison if Jimmy doesn't do this. She leaves Jimmy the file of the killer in hopes that Jimmy changes his mind. In the middle of the night, Jimmy opens up the file and it's about Lawrence Hall. The next scenes with Brian Miller will showcase how they managed to capture this killer. The movie flashes back and forth between this past and Jimmy's time in prison. In Perrysville, Indiana, a cop escorts Brian Miller to a cornfield where they have located Jessica Roach's body. This was the girl from the beginning of the show who was biking. Brian looks at her body in sadness. Later, a witness says he saw a white man get into a Dodge van, but he's not sure what the color was. Brian follows up on a report of a van who followed 2 14-year-old girls. The man in the van said he liked their boobies. Brian is able to get a license plate from the report. The car is owned by a man named Larry Hall, also known as Lawrence Hall. Jimmy's stepmom Sammy visits him and tells him the bad news about Big Jim having a stroke. Sammy tells him to try his best to get out of prison because his dad doesn't have much longer. She insists Jimmy take the deal about getting a confession from Larry. Brian gets a call from Chris who tells him more about Larry Hall. Larry Hall grew up on a gravesite and was teased a lot. Chris says Larry is harmless and is a serial confessor. Chris hesitantly sets up a meeting with Brian and Larry. However, Chris really doesn't believe Larry has anything to do with Jessica's death. Eventually, Jimmy accepts Lauren's deal and wants to do the prison transfer. However, there are a few more candidates they are looking into. Lauren advises him to keep reading the files so that he can get the job. At the interrogation, cops tell Brian they doubt Larry has done it. Apparently, Larry just likes to confess to cops. Larry likes to grow out his sideburns for Civil War and Revolutionary War reenactments. Brian asks Larry if he participated in a Revolutionary War reenactment in Illinois. This reenactment is around the same place and time when Jessica went missing. Larry isn't sure exactly when, but he said he definitely attended one. Larry also has a Dodge van, just like the witness said earlier. Larry remembers talking to 2 girls who told him to F himself. Supposedly he's been stalking a jogger named Abby as well. The 2 cops tell them about Larry's vivid dreams. In his dreams, he kills women. Meanwhile, Jimmy is doing his homework on Larry. March 29, 1993, in the city of Marion, in a college campus, a white Dodge van follows a girl walking. It pulls up in front of her, then she disappears. Later, Lauren asks Jimmy what types of women he's into. She brings up what types of tits he likes. He begins to flirt with Lauren, but Lauren shuts it down. She says the questions were to see if Jimmy could find common ground with Larry. Meanwhile, Larry disassociates and says he doesn't actually kill women. Brian shows Larry a photo of Jessica and asks if she showed up in Larry's dreams. Larry flinches a little and asks to go home, then gets mad. Outside, the 3 cops are upset at Brian because they all think Brian is wrong. They think they have the right suspect already for their case in Marion, and they want Brian to go home to his city to find Jessica's killer. These 3 cops really think Larry is innocent and just has something mentally wrong with him, and they think he just likes to confess to murders for attention. Eventually, Brian gets Lauren and Beaumont involved in his case so they can charge Larry for Jessica's murder. They try to get Larry to take a polygraph test, but he doesn't think he'll pass. He asks Brian to leave because Brian's energy makes Larry feel itchy. He starts to rant about how he's afraid to sleep because of his nightmares. Meanwhile, Lauren and Brian watch from the other room. Larry says he wishes he was with a woman. He uses his dreams to be with women, and he says that's probably why he does such horrible things in his dreams. He's given a photo of Jessica and he remembers what he did to Jessica. Larry says Jessica was really nice to him, and he remembers Jessica in his van. Larry didn't have time to bury Jessica, but all the other girls he usually buried. Everyone listens shocked to his confession. Larry even admits to killing the girl in Marion, and he hates the guy who is taking credit for it. He admits that he has no full control over his body. He starts to describe how he treated Trisha Rietler's clothes, which is not public knowledge, and it's accurate. So the cops get a warrant for Larry's home. Chris walks in feeling stupid as shit. The detectives print out a statement admitting to the murders to have Larry sign it. At first, Larry has no recollection of doing any of this. Then he says no wonder he can't sleep at night. He starts to cry. At Larry's home, an entire team of investigators are on the property searching for clues. Everything in the house is a mess, but his van is super clean. Jimmy calls his dad to see how he's doing. Big Jim is very weak, has trouble walking, talking, and even went blind for a few moments. Later, Lauren and Jimmy have a meeting. Lauren quizzes Jimmy on Larry. Larry has a twin named Gary, and in the womb, they experienced fetal syndrome, in which Gary pretty much got all the good nutrients in the womb while Larry was left with shit. Gary got being athletic, good looks, and a normal brain development, while Larry was left with being incompetent. Gary defends his brother and doesn't think his brother did anything. He thinks Larry is just desperate for attention. Lauren advises Jimmy to be like a Gary to Larry, to act like his brother. Lauren then tells Jimmy that he will be transferring prisons now. Meanwhile, Brian sees the cops getting credit for his work. There's an announcement congratulating the cops who didn't believe Larry was the killer. In the private plane, Jimmy is told only the warden and psychiatrist know his true identity. Lauren tells him to not approach Larry too soon, otherwise Larry will know what's going on. Later, Brian takes Larry out on a car ride to help him remember some of his dreams. He's angry because he feels like his confession was coerced. He says he has a lawyer now and doesn't want to talk to Brian about anything. Once they are about to approach the prison, Jimmy starts to have second thoughts about going into the prison. Everyone convinces him that this is his chance to do good with the world, and that this is their only chance to sneak him into the facility. He agrees to go in. During the ruling for Larry Hall's appeal, the judge sees Larry's confession as coerced, so more than likely Larry may walk soon. They really need Jimmy to work fast on Larry's confession. Lauren calls Brian to tell her about the insider that she planted in the prison for Larry. Jimmy experiences loneliness at the cafeteria and feels like he's going insane during lockdown. Jimmy explains what he's gone through during his first week in this new prison. People are stabbed. People vomit in the cafeteria. Larry is in a cell directly across from Jimmy. In line for pills, Jimmy tries to talk to Larry, but Larry is a brick wall. Jimmy is forced to take antidepressants that his psychiatrist prescribed him. At the cafeteria, Jimmy introduces himself to Larry, but Larry stays quiet. Later, Jimmy's dad visits him in prison, and Jimmy tells him that he shouldn't be there because it could blow his cover. Big Jim feels bad because his mind is deteriorating, and he totally forgot about the deal Jimmy is taking. Lauren and Brian go over missing girls' cases that have gone cold. Apparently, Larry had confessed to killing another girl named Raina Risson, even had her birth control pills in his van, along with a ski mask, knives, and a missing poster of Trisha Rietler. Then the cops let him go because they also believed he was just a serial confessor. Larry has a talent of confessing to murders, then being let go. One day, Jimmy asks Larry what he does around the prison for fun. Jimmy just walks him to the TV room. While they watch America's Most Wanted, someone changes the channel. Larry is upset about it but does nothing. Jimmy stands up for them and changes the channel for Larry. The guy threatens Jimmy, but Jimmy beats him up instead. Larry watches the altercation while Jimmy is brought to solitary confinement. After Jimmy is let out, Larry strikes up a conversation, asks him why Jimmy was sticking up for him. Then their conversation steers to cars and Larry's favorite vehicle, vans. A correctional officer named Carter takes him aside and tells him he knows Jimmy is a snitch and blackmails him for 10 grand, or else he'll reveal his identity. Eventually, Jimmy goes to Larry's cell and compliments the photos of the reenactments that Larry would do with his brother. Larry feels suspicious about Jimmy's niceness, but Jimmy says he's just simply being nice since they're in prison already. Later, Jimmy talks to his dad about all the money he's hidden in the house. However, Big Jim has spent it all. Jimmy has some drugs stashed still, so he's able to use that to earn the 10 grand Carter wants. Meanwhile, Lauren and Brian go to see the sheriff responsible for a Raina Rissen's cold case. The sheriff says Larry was 100 miles away that night in Kentucky doing a Civil War reenactment. The sheriff is upset because he did a very thorough job on the case and found nothing. The only thing he found was Larry purposefully planting evidence on himself and confessed to a case he didn't actually commit. At the library, the two bond some more and Larry says he peaked in the womb while Jimmy peaked in high school. The correctional officer interrupts them and he continues to blackmail Jimmy about his 10 grand. At a bar, Lauren starts to second guess if Larry is actually the killer. But Brian reiterates that Larry is really good at this since he used to be a janitor. He has chemical solvents to clean up his mess. He used to be a gravedigger as well. Lauren isn't fully convinced since they've been researching all these cold cases and haven't found anything to pin on Larry. In the boiler room, Larry shows Jimmy what he does in prison for most of his days. Jimmy starts to talk about how all bodily fluids seem to have some sort of function. He starts to hold on to his private areas and talking about how wet girls' areas can be. He says he's never had a wet one before. All the women he's been with have all been scratchy like pine bark. He says the way he penetrates women is by just jamming it in, and he doesn't care how the girls feel. Jimmy is deeply disturbed by all of this. Later, Jimmy's dad visits him and says there are no drugs to sell because it was taken by Danny. Jimmy feels like he's going to get his identity revealed, but luckily the correctional officer Carter is nowhere to be found. Lauren eventually visits Jimmy and questions if Larry is even a murderer. Jimmy says Larry is definitely a murderer. Lauren tells Jimmy they can get him transferred back to his old prison if he wants. She tells him that Larry will end up being released if the judge decides that his confession was coerced. Jimmy remembers how Larry's eyes looked when Larry was describing wet private parts, and Jimmy knows for a fact that Larry is a murderer. He's willing to stay in prison to get Larry to show where all the girls' bodies are. The episode ends with a tribute to Ray Liotta, the actor playing Jimmy's dad. If you would like us to finish the rest of the series, let us know in the comments below.
Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.